We are live. At least I think we are. For the most part, it's hard to tell sometimes. But joining me today, as always, a very special guest. Bence, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do for those who might not know you.
Sure. First, thanks for having me on. I've followed consciousness online for a very long time. Probably from before you were doing the video series, right? I mean, you did consciousness online kind of things for more than a decade. Is that right?
Yeah, that's
The
basically right.
conferences. Yeah.
Yeah, you were a part of
Um,
the Consciousness Online conferences. Yeah.
yeah, probably two of them. Yeah, I don't. Anyway, so my name is Bence, and I am a philosopher of sort. Sometimes I say that I'm a cognitive scientist. When I don't want people to ask more questions. I'm mainly doing philosophy of mind and aesthetics. And I guess I'm here because of philosophy of mind. I recently wrote a book on mental imagery. So I spent a lot of time working on mental imagery, and I'm sure we're gonna touch on that.
Okay. Yeah.
Now this is called consciousness online. So I should say that I'm not I don't love consciousness. I mean, I love consciousness. I don't love consciousness research. I don't love the consciousness bits of philosophy of mind that much.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, so I'll definitely have to ask you why
This
that.
is to provoke you right at the beginning.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a blog called Philosophy Sucks, so I don't know how provoked I'll be, or rather in agreement with you. Hold on, I'm trying to adjust something, maybe just a setting here real fast.
Your blog is called Philosophy Sucks.
Yeah, it is.
I once organized a conference called Introspection Sucks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so Schwitzgebel was one of the people who was giving a talk, and he had this whole talk about what it means to suck.
Okay. Interesting. He would, of course, he would take
Yeah, he
it.
was. Yeah.
Exactly. Now I want to look that up and find out what his answer was. I mean, part of it is because I don't know if you know of the band called Primus, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
they people who like Primus often chant Primus sucks at their concert, and
Uh-huh.
as a way of saying they like it. But also, I like it to be more serious. The blog is called Philosophy Sucks, partially because I like science, and philosophy is very
Yeah.
annoying without some contact to the empirical realm, and it feels oftentimes like you get stuck in these terminological circle debates that don't go anywhere. So I do really appreciate your approach to philosophy generally, where you try to connect it to the sciences in a two-way manner, which I think is important. So your work is not only just like, hey, I'm a philosopher who wants to borrow all your cool science stuff, but you're also someone who thinks that, hey, science, you should borrow some of our cool philosophy stuff, and there should be a two-way interchange. So I really find that approach to be well, most congenial to the way I think about
That's
things.
exactly what I take myself to be doing. But do I say that anywhere? I say that in grant applications because that's what they give me money for. Uh, Bidirectional interaction. Right?
Yeah,
But yeah,
but I think it's more
no,
than a grant
I really believe in
application.
this. I really
Yeah,
believe in this. So, I mean, I say that, but I really believe in this.
exactly. And I think it shows in your work, actually, that you really believe this, and in the way that you run well, I don't know what the center that you run. I don't really know the details of the thing that you do. Or I know it's very interesting. Lots of cool people go there. But can you tell us a little bit about what the center for, what's it
Oh
called,
yeah.
first of all? And
So
what
it's
does it
called
do?
well prepared there. So it's called Center for Philosophical Psychology, and it's kind of conveniently hides whether I'm a philosopher or a psychologist. So
Okay.
that's a good thing. But yeah, this year actually, and last year, I'm taking a break from having a group. I have
Oh,
a very small
interesting.
group now because I overdid it a little bit before that. So
Okay.
yeah, I'm gonna come. I'm gonna advertise some positions
Oh, okay.
later
Sorry,
this
I
fall.
didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it was just too much, and
It is a lot. I can imagine. I mean, you were quite busy for several years in a row. So, I mean, managing multiple postdocs, visiting people, all sorts of stuff going on over there.
I had 18 postdocs in the last year. So.
Okay.
No, I mean I love them. I love each and every one of them, and it's great to have that. It's just I did not have any time to do anything else. So
Yeah, no, it's good. So hopefully it doesn't go away though, because that's obviously tremendous service for those people who have the opportunity to come and get together and talk about these issues.
Well, the other thing is that when I stopped it, I realized this is not what you want to talk
No,
about.
it is. That's what we're here
But
for.
so I really thought that the job market is picking up, and I don't, the profession doesn't really need my postdocs anymore because there's lots of other places. But now, recently,
Yeah.
there's some interest in postdoc positions in Europe.
Yes, I wonder why. Could be suspiciously timed with various political things in the
It's the
U.S.
food. It's the
It's the
food. The
food.
food
Yeah,
is better.
exactly. Exactly. I see. I hadn't thought about it quite in that way. Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. Okay. And
But
I
that's
like
right.
philosophical psychology. I like that name. And by the way, no one could ever accuse me of being well prepared. That's not the point of these
Oh,
discussions.
that's good. That's good.
But
You're better prepared than I am, I can tell you that much. I actually inherited the center and the name, and I didn't come up with this. And it has some kind of like weird Husserlian origins, I think,
interesting. I
which I
did
don't
not
really
know
know as
that.
much about as I should.
I've often
But
thought
I
about
love I
writing.
love the name, and I can really identify with that. So yeah.
Exactly. I've often thought about writing like a philosophical psychology textbook where you try to introduce psychology, but also the philosophy
Mhm.
alongside it, which I find often they're artificially separated. So I do like the project.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to sort of turn from these more abstract questions to more questions about your work. So
Okay.
I did read your book, Mental Imagery. I guess you published that in 2023. Is it been
That's
two
right.
years already since that came out?
Yeah.
It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. I was one of those people who got to the appendix and found you talking to me and saying, "Hey, did you start wondering what wasn't mental imagery by the end of this book?" I was like, "Haha, yes, I did actually." So I found it's an amazing achievement. It's like very readable, obviously, because you intended it for a general audience. It seems, but so
Well, not for a
not
general audience, but for a non-expert audience. But maybe there are some people in the audience who have not read the book. So for them, it might be worth adding that in the appendix, I'm saying that it must be really I mean it's really annoying to read this book because I go through various phenomena and I say, "Ooh, that's mental imagery. That's also mental imagery. That's also mental imagery." So then you wonder, "Oh, okay, is there anything that's not mental imagery?" So that's what you're referring to, right?
exactly, and it's 30 chapters of that. It's
Yeah.
30 chapters of that's mental imagery, that's mental imagery, which is super cool. And I want to talk about a lot of that stuff because I found much of it very illuminating and super interesting. Um, and some of that stuff towards the end about like action and knowledge
Mhm.
and stuff I found extremely fascinating. So it's just a really cool book. I hope it gets wide uptake and people read it. So it's not meant for general audience, but for a non-expert audience.
Yeah, right. I mean,
It's very readable. I found it's accessible. I think, and it introduces you to a wide amount of research and philosophy and perceptual science, and connects it to philosophy.
yeah.
So it's a lot to recommend it.
Yeah, I worked really hard on especially the empirical side because it's just so much, especially with the new research on aphantasia, which I'm sure you're going to ask me about.
I am.
There's just so much more. Like every week, there's hundreds of things that you would have to read. So
Well, and then you make a big deal. I heard you say one time that that's a good thing about philosophers is they have time to read and connect the big picture together. So maybe this is an example of you trying to do that. How long did it take to write the book? Just out of curiosity.
to actually write it, or did the whole research going into
The
it?
whole kit and
So,
caboodle.
okay, so usually I write very short books, like 60,000 words. This was twice as much because I just couldn't fit it in. So I spent way more time on this than I should have, and it's just reading up on all the. So the issue is that it's not just that I had to read up on the imagery research because the general structure of the book is just I'm trying to show that there are all these big questions about perception, there's all these big questions about cognition, all these big questions about action, and then imagery it kind of plays a role in each and every one of them. So I had to be kind of on top of each and every one of these kind of sub-literatures, and by which I mean both the empirical literature and the philosophical literature. So that was just a lot. I remember that. All right, origin story time. I did my dissertation on something else, on animal cognition and kind of the role of action, action perception, link, stuff like that. And then I hated it so much when I started my first job that I just didn't want to touch that stuff ever, which is just the worst professional decision you can ever make. I always tell my people that just don't do that. It's tempting to do that because you're sick and tired of your dissertation. You want to do something else.
Yeah, I did that.
And you did that.
Oh yeah, I wrote my dissertation in meta ethics.
Oh, so you never turned back. You never went back. I
Never,
see.
no.
Interesting. Well, I did go back eventually, but I mean a little
Okay.
bit. But it's just right after finishing the dissertation, I just couldn't imagine doing more of that stuff. So I switched to something else, and they asked me. So it's Syracuse University. Sorry. Um, and I had to do a graduate seminar, and they asked me what I want to do it on, and I said, well, I want to do it on imagination. So
Hmm.
so I did that, and then that's how I just kind of switched this off completely.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So that's what got you into this whole thing was you had to teach that class and then you realized there's a lot going on here.
Well, I mean, I chose that class because I thought that there's just a lot of really interesting thing coming together in imagination. But that was in 2006.
Hmm.
Um, and so I basically started, I did the initial readings for this book in 2006. So it's been almost 2 decades.
Yeah, it's 20 years almost.
So
Okay.
that's a long time, yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, good. It's good to hear that in a way because when you read this book and you see the amount of stuff that's in there, you're like, okay, I hope this guy didn't come out within a year and a half or something and really learn all this. Right.
No, no, it was a really long time, and I really I sank a lot of love into this. So
Yeah, exactly. It shows. So it's well worth reading. And of course, you have many other things, and that we'll hopefully touch on. But just to correct a couple of things that came up earlier. So this what we're doing right now is called Consciousness Live because we're
mhm.
live. And so Consciousness Online was my conference that I organized, which sadly
Okay,
is defunct. But I might someday go back to organizing it. I only stopped organizing it really because like I sort of felt there was a lot of other online stuff going on, but and also like LaGuardia where I worked, they didn't care and told me basically,
really.
yeah, no, they said like you've done enough of that. Maybe like more college contributions. It would subtly hinted to me would be important. So anyway,
That was amazing. I mean, I realize this is not what we're, what people, but that was just really cool stuff.
oh, thank you. Yeah,
Everyone coming together, and it was about, although it was called Consciousness Online, but there were a lot of things. I mean, it was really kind of a empirically informed philosophy of mind online,
exactly.
right?
That's what it
Not really,
was.
not only about
It doesn't
consciousness
sound as
and
cool though.
right. And if you look at the lineup from those years, I mean, all of those people are like heavy hitters these days, right? It's
Exactly.
really
It was really an amazing thing. And you know why I'll reveal the secret, you know why it was successful was because Phil Papers had just started. And so when I put out a call for papers and then I
Mhm.
got submissions and then I was like, I don't know anything about this area. So I went to Phil Papers and I was like, who wrote on this? And then I would email them and be like, hey, will you comment on this paper or read it for me or whatever. So I got to like I used Phil Papers early on, before it was like a thing. So it really helped actually knowing about people who I wouldn't have otherwise known about. And many people had kind of told me like, including some famous people, that online conferences wouldn't succeed and I was wasting my time. So not only was I sort of, LaGuardia was telling me this was not a great idea, but other like senior people,
Really?
yeah, people who, if you heard that from, you might think twice about doing something. But you know, I don't. So I felt like it was very important. And my one tweak on because I wasn't the first one to do online conference. My one tweak was I thought video was important, and that if you could see people, then it would change the tone of the online discussion from acrimonious or whatever to maybe more helpful because then you would actually think of them as a person. And now I think that
Yeah.
a lot's changed on the internet since that time in the 2000 whenever that was 2009 2010 but that was the idea. And also I connected to the publications which other online conferences didn't do. I tried to make a special journal issue or a book out of every conference that I organized, to
And
have.
also like really good places. I remember that the
Yeah.
one that I did was in field studies. I mean, that's pretty
Exactly.
good.
Exactly. It's not too bad. So I am proud of that. I was what I learned from that was that one person doing something is cool, but unless you can connect it to an institution or an organization.
Mm.
So I was really like the ASSC or the NYU Center for Brain, Mind, and Consciousness. Someone like that should come in to me and say, "Hey, we'll sponsor it," but no one did. So
CUNY didn't. CUNY did not. Was not interested. Graduate Center.
well, yeah, no, they don't. They. I mean, I don't know. They don't seem to be interested in anything that I'm doing. So that's all right. It's fine. I think these things still could be done though, and I want to eventually circle back around to them. So I'm glad to hear you mention those because they seem like ancient
That's
history
amazing.
now.
And also, you were way ahead of the time. I mean, the whole online conferencing was really a big thing during COVID, but that was like a decade before COVID, right?
Yeah, but I was inspired by the online philosophy conference that had been put together previously. So there was it kind of
Yeah, you were not the first one, but I
yeah.
feel that that was just, and also it was kind of a tradition. There was one every year for like 4 years or 5 years or
5 years,
something like
yeah, until they
5 years.
told me that it wasn't helpful for me to keep doing it.
Oh,
And some other things happen. Anyway, so yes, I really appreciate you mentioning that. That's nice. But as cool as I am, we are here to talk about you. So this book of yours is very to get back to the mental imagery
yeah.
debate. One of the things that strikes me. Oh, sorry, no, not to get back to that. To correct some things earlier, you said you don't
Okay.
like consciousness, but I am
Yeah.
gonna talk to you about this paper that you have with Manilo Martinez about intentionalism, which is a view
Oh,
about
yeah.
consciousness.
And content.
Yeah, exactly. But perceptual phenomenology, which is consciousness, one might think. So I do think that you have some. This paper just came out in 2024, but I assume since it's J. Phil that you must have been written it like back in 1990 or something. So.
No, actually, not really. So I gave a talk right before the pandemic at one of those ESPP conferences on this idea, and then Manolo, who was a good friend, and me were talking afterwards about how he said that we should. I don't know. So we wrote it up together, and it was not that long in the making. Uh, I mean, when I say I don't like consciousness, I don't. Yeah, it's just a stupid provocative statement. What I really mean is that I feel that there are more interesting questions to explain about the mind than about how consciousness works. And that is a very interesting question. It seems like that's what gets all the attention.
Yeah.
That irks me a little bit. That I think there's a lot of other questions that are completely independent of consciousness. That's about the mind that I'm more interested in,
Yeah.
or
Exactly.
as interested as in consciousness.
And I
And I,
support
yeah.
that. And when I talk about like this is called consciousness live and that's consciousness online, I
Hmm.
think of consciousness as just bringing up the mind. Like as soon as you say the
Oh,
consciousness word,
okay.
you're in the realm of talking about the mind. So I don't really mean to be focusing only on consciousness. I want to talk about the mind, generally speaking, for which
Yeah,
consciousness is
but
a
I'm
real
also
feature.
fairly committed to, in fact, I'm very committed to thinking of the non-conscious part of the mind.
Yeah.
And part of what I'm doing in the imagery book is to try to argue that mental imagery can be unconscious.
Exactly. And that segues nicely into what I was going to ask you about that. So, I mean, I know you define mental imagery in a way that I think maybe is, well, I don't know. I was going to ask you, is it like kind of unique to your way of thinking because you define it as early sensory processing, not directly activated by a stimulus? I don't know if I got that all right. Hopefully in the ballpark at
Good
least.
rephrasing. Well,
Okay.
sorry.
So if so, I take that.
Sorry, can we interrupt a little bit? My one of my kids is contacting me, and she's at an airport.
Absolutely, yes.
Is that okay? Can we
Absolutely.
put this on hold?
Yes. All right. So this is the joys of live broadcasting. Hopefully, there's nothing too seriously important going on. But let's see. Someone is asking in the chat. Ask Bence what is his favorite book. Okay. Oops. I hope he can't hear me if I'm annoying him if he's talking to us. Let me mute myself until he comes back.
All right, I'm back.
Oh. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Cool. No, I hope everything's all right. If you need to go, you just let me know. But
No, that's fine.
okay, cool. So I was just stalling. Someone was asking what your favorite book is. I don't know why that's relevant, but I'm not sure if they mean philosophy book or just book generally. You do quote a lot of literature in your book, so I know you like to read.
Ask them whether they mean literature or philosophy.
Yeah. Do you mean literature or philosophy? So we'll see if they get back to us.
Are they paying attention?
Yeah, exactly. So there is a little delay on the live broadcast. I think it's like a few seconds or something to give you some time in case something bad happens. I was going to ask you about this definition of mental imagery that you
Yeah.
have, and especially this idea that it can occur unconsciously, which I think is an important idea. But so first of all, can you tell us how you think of mental imagery? And then also whether you think this definition is importantly at odds with like why might I say canonical or traditional way that this is thought of in philosophy and or science, and if so, how these three things relate.
Sure. So I think of perception, like perception when I'm looking at the screen and I'm seeing your face, as various perceptual processing that are going towards a perceptual representation. So it's a forming of a perceptual representation on the basis of the stimulus. So it's perceptual representation that's directly triggered by sensory input. Sensory input is, light rays hitting my retina, and on the basis of that, all kinds of crap is going on, and then I form a perceptual representation of your face. Now, mental imagery is that if I still form a perceptual representation of your face, but in a way that's not directly triggered by the sensory stimulation. So and that's part of the whole point of writing my book. My whole idea of writing a book is that there's this parallel between mental imagery and perception. Both of them are perceptual representations. Just one of them is directly triggered by the sensory input, and the other one is not directly triggered by the sensory input.
Mm-hmm.
And the format is the same. The format of these representations are the same, and so on. Now, is this your question was whether that's just me or everyone thinks this, or I think that anyone in psychology or in neuroscience would say this, sometimes in different words. Sometimes they will talk about consciousness and stuff like that, but I think the reason for that is because they're not careful enough. And if pushed, and I've been pushing them for decades, that's exactly what they're gonna say. That's what mental imagery is, or that's how it should be used.
Can I just ask? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, no, you were about to say philosophers. Okay, go ahead, finish. You finish, then I'll ask.
And philosophers, they do often define mental imagery in terms of the conscious feel. I will say that. I don't think that's warranted, but for various reasons. And I think I started this whole little spiel about with this parallel with perception. So perception can be conscious or unconscious, right? Unless you're talking to, Ian Phillips. And
he won't talk to me for some reason.
Really?
I tried to get him on like a bunch of times.
I'm sure he's gonna. He's a nice guy. Uh, and then so that would be perceptual representation directly triggered by sensory input that can be conscious or unconscious. So if you're talking about perceptual representation that's triggered indirectly by sensory input, why wouldn't that be conscious or unconscious?
Right.
So I want to say that tying mental imagery to consciousness is really a mistake. Perceptual representation.
So what I'm thinking of is like I agree with you about the consciousness thing. I think some people might think that is controversial. I'm not one of them. But what I'm not hearing in your setup here, which I think might be the more controversial part, is if you take like mental imagery in the visual case, and you think of it as like an imagistic state or something like that, then often people will say things like a part of it represents a part of the stimulus in a kind of way that these more cognitive representations don't. So if I think, there's a red ball, there's no part of that represents a part of the red ball in a way that a picture of the red ball, a small slice of it would represent that small slice of the red ball or something like that. So there's this kind of like, I don't know. So this difference in, format and you were saying sort of that it's not like that. So that was what was making me wonder if your definition was slightly, that you had to argue for it because it would be like not the way that people would come to the debate thinking of it.
So when people talk about imagistic format, stuff like that, that's when these things like parts principle or picture principle
Exactly.
come up.
Yeah.
I feel that all of that is just kind of falls out of the way I think about mental imagery because for me, mental imagery must have the same format as perceptual representation because both are perceptual representations. All that the only difference between them is the etiology, right? It's one of them is triggered by the sensory input directly, and the other one indirectly. So, so yeah, so the format is gonna be if perception has the format that has this kind of parts principle thing that you're talking about, then so will mental imagery. So I feel what is the really interesting question. Well, there's a lot of interesting questions. One of them is what makes perceptual representations different from other kinds of representations, and we can talk about that. And their format might be an interesting. I mean, my money would be on something like a format difference. Uh, but then the other question, which is much more, that's closer to the main topic of this book, is about what's the difference between kind of online perceptual representation and offline perceptual
Right.
representation. And that's where I want to talk about how the difference is the relation to the input. But as you can imagine, I had a lot of conversation with philosophers who think about imagery, about these things, and I think that at the end of the day, whatever they think about mental imagery is not substantially different from what I'm pushing here.
Okay.
So I don't think it's that controversial. It shouldn't be that controversial the way I think about imagery,
Interesting.
and
Yeah.
but with the exception of this less emphasis on consciousness.
Okay, cool. That's very informative. So that kind of leads me to the next thing I was curious about, which is do you care about the Ned Block project of trying to distinguish a joint in nature between perception and cognition in such a way that they are maybe joint systems that work together but distinct things? Or is that not something that you really care about how it works out one way or the other, given your views about these things?
Does he watch these things?
Say well, the things we were just talking about what mental imagery turns out to be
No,
and
no,
how.
no. Does Ned watch these videos? That's
Oh
what I want to
yeah,
answer.
I don't think he has time to watch these videos, no.
Oh, that's good.
But I will
Uh,
see him on Monday.
okay. So I don't think that that's like I don't see that as the most burning question about the mind or
Okay,
about perception, to be honest.
okay,
I think everything I say in this book would be consistent with a net block-like picture where there's cognition and there's perception and there's some very nice principled way of making a distinction between them. It would also be compatible with a way of thinking about the relation between perception and cognition, where there's a bit of a gray zone in between. And at a stretch, although I really don't like those views, it would also be uh, consistent with those views. Well, maybe not, maybe not. Maybe not with those views that are like absolutely no difference between perception and cognition, right? Because I want to say that what's distinctive about mental imagery is a perceptual rather than a non-perceptual representation. So as long as you can say something about there's point to some kind of a difference between perceptual and non-perceptual representations, we're good.
okay. So
Even if there's a kind of a big gray zone when it's really not clear, oh, is this perceptual, is not perceptual. In fact, this is one thing that I was thinking about a lot when I was writing the book about how to navigate that. Uh, and so I want to say that, yeah, mental imagery is perceptual representation, but how do I know that something is a perceptual representation or not? So
exactly.
when it comes to late vision, it's very difficult to tell. Is there going to be perception? Is there going to be cognition? Some empirical people would think of it as non-perceptual. Some others would think of it as perceptual.
Right.
Who am I to tell? So when it comes at the end of the day, I really wanted to focus on early cortical processing because that's perceptual for sure. So most of my examples are from that kind of, at least in the empirical literature, are
I
from
see.
that.
And that is why you do focus a lot on V1, V2, those like lower level areas.
Which does not imply that nothing else is going to be perception or something like that.
Right.
But they must be perceptual. They must be part of the perceptual system, right? No
I
matter how
see.
you carve it up.
So you were just looking for like a non-controversial area to make your point, and then you could like encroach on other areas or not.
But I'm really not sure I see why we should think that the big question is about how to divide perception from cognition.
Interesting. Okay. And that's, I mean, the reason why I was bringing that up is because I was exactly wondering, like, where do you draw the line? And maybe it's going to turn out that some processing that's triggered indirectly by the stimulus is cognitive, according to some definition that someone might have of that. So then it would turn out that mental imagery could be cognitive in a sense on your view, or in a gray zone where it was like, and it sounds like you are saying that actually that you would allow that. Maybe you wouldn't want to call it cognitive because it's mental imagery, but it would fall in this zone of like, well, you could call it cognitive or it has elements of cognition at least. So, for example, one example that Block uses a lot is the way imagistic representations might be taken up into working memory, and then he will say things like they are wrapped in a cognitive envelope, and you go, I wonder what that means, but it really just means broadcast into the global workspace or something like that. So that you have these imagistic representations which are broadcast into working memory, and but that doesn't make them cognitive according to Ned. That makes them perceptual representations which are wrapped in a cognitive envelope. And that's a very important distinction for him. But basically, you're saying it could go either way. You could call that state, and this also kind of comes up with these dual content theories and these other things that you do talk about in various places. So some of this is going to be like it depends on like how you type psychological states, generally speaking, and that's sort of not really known how we should do it. So that to me seems to be what the
Yeah.
issue. So why I'm interested. So you could have many reasons to be interested in this question, and not to knock Ned's project. It may or may not be the main topic, but it's important in my opinion because this is what we're interested in. Like, how do we type psychological states if we're trying to be serious about like getting a theory of the mind? And you want to type them one way, someone else might want to type them another way. So if we move past early cortical processing at all, then what do you think is going to be the way to resolve these kinds of debates, or do you think we're just going to get bored of asking these questions eventually?
Good. So there's various things that I can say about this. One of them is that luckily enough, the really interesting kinds of mental imagery that plays a very important role in all of these processes is going to be early cortical
Yeah,
stimulation
yeah.
or early cortical processing that's not directly triggered by sensory stimulation. So I don't really need to think about, I mean, in some sense, I don't, in order to make the argument of the book, I don't need to be committed to what those, borderline cases, whether they're going to count as imagery or not. And
Hmm.
it's, the mind is messy. I mean, have you seen a brain? It's messy. It's very unlikely that there's going to be this kind of, oh, all right, perception until here, and then cognition from here. So
Yeah.
there's always a certain kind of explanatory vagueness there. I don't know.
Okay.
But also, I mean, so I really want to be clear that it's not. I don't think I'm not really. I don't really care about the labeling here that much.
Yeah.
What I care about is that there's certain kind of processes that I use the label mental imagery to pick out. They really play a very important role in a lot of very diverse and different kind of mental
Yeah.
processes or phenomena. And if you want to call them imagery, fine. If you don't want to call them imagery, that's also fine. If you don't want to call them representations that constitute them perceptual representations, we can debate that, or we can talk about that, or what is perceptual representation and all that, and that's fine. That's interesting, but that's not the main project. The main project is not labeling. The main project is to make these claims about how this weird kind of mental phenomenon that I'm trying to put my hands on, my
Hmm.
finger on, plays a role in all these exciting mental phenomena.
Interesting. Yeah, and I agree that it does, and that's an important and interesting point all by itself. I was just curious about how far you thought it was compatible with
Well,
these other views.
I mean, another thing that I'm quite committed to is some form of top-down influences in the perceptual system. I don't think we have a way of questioning that. And if that's the case, then we can make sense of this kind of cognitive envelope in some ways. I think. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
not sure maybe what that means by that, but then there's going to be various cross communication across any kind of divide
Hmm.
in the mind, and
Exactly.
then
Yeah.
perceptual representation is going to be heavily influenced by all kinds of other things that's going on in the mind. So
I mean, so one of the things is we can. I'm going to move on in just one second, but one kind of final related thing in this area that was making me think about this was things like iconic memory
Mhm.
and the so-called short-term visual fragile memory, which, if you know this distinction, sometimes people like it, sometimes they don't. But the basic idea is that there are these, you can present a stimulus, and then 100 milliseconds up, maybe some people can say up to 4 seconds under the right circumstances. After that, there's a mental visual representation of the stimulus. So that seems to me like it would be mental imagery on your view, this kind of iconic memory, because it's indirectly caused by its perseverance. Is well, that's maybe my question: is it directly or indirectly caused according to your view? So does it count as perceptual or imagery
Mhm.
on your kind of view? Where and the timing here is going to matter, but we might say like let's say after 200 milliseconds or something like that, after the stimulus is gone.
So the timing is gonna matter a lot. So I have a chapter there called what is it called?
Temporal,
Temperament,
yeah.
temperamental imagery, where I do spend quite some time on the issue of the timing. So all right, so here's maybe I'm gonna go from kind of a distance to talk about this. One way in which so the way I formulated the difference between perception and mental imagery is that in the case of mental imagery, you have a perceptual representation that is not directly triggered by the sensory input. Now, that's a negative definition, right? And I don't tell you what it is directly triggered by. Whereas in the case of perception, it's directly triggered by the sensory input. Here is one way in which we can have like a nice intuitive sense of what's going on. In the case of perceptual representation, there's a causal link, and there's a causal link that's also accompanied by some form of correspondence, right? So when I'm looking at you, there's certain kind of structural features of my retinal of my retina of the activation of my retina, and there's also a certain kind of structural features of what's going on in my primary visual cortex, and there's a beautiful spatial correspondence between the two, right?
Yeah.
When I close my eyes and I visualize your face, there is no correspondence between what's going on in my retina and what's going on in my primary visual cortex. So that would be kind of some kind of a spatial correspondence, but you can also talk about temporal correspondence, right? So in the case of perception, what's going on is that there's some things happening with the sensory stimulation, and then shortly after that, and we have very good ways of really assessing how long it's supposed to last. There is going to be early cortical stimulation. If there, and that is in kind of direct perceptual representations. In the case of mental imagery, in the case of temporal mental imagery, you have early cortical activation that does not temporally correspond to the sensory stimulation. Either it comes way before or way after. So I guess my answer to your question is going to be just what exactly is going to be the timing. So if the timing is really just within the range of normal perceptual activation spreading, that then that would not be the imagery. That would just be just normal perception, direct perception, like online perception. But if there's a delay, then that would be temporal mental imagery.
Then it would become mental imagery at that point.
Temporal
Okay.
mental imagery.
And so, what is the argument for the delay? Because you might have thought it's just like a continuation of the perceptual processing, which it is in some sense, but obviously the stimulus is gone, so it's not stimulus driven. But what is the reason for thinking that the delay should move it into a separate category?
Well, I mean, if you think about it as a like if I have an episodic memory of something that I did this morning, that would be temporal mental imagery of a certain kind, and that sounds like mental imagery, right? I mean, that seems like a very widely accepted claim that mental imagery is that episodic memory is a form of mental imagery.
Yeah.
Uh,
So, well, hold on. So, what isn't temporal mental imagery, given that it's always after? I mean, right? Isn't this going to be just like every instance?
so what imagery is not temporal imagery?
Yeah.
Well, there's all kind of mental imagery that's not kind of an echo or a kind of a preview of something that will actually uh, be the sensory stimulation. So if you close your eyes and visualize a unicorn, that would not be temporal mental imagery, right? If you're amodal completion is not, which for me mental imagery would not be temporal mental imagery. It would just be spatial imagery. But it's a really interesting question that I didn't really go into about how the.
But so the amodal completion thing is interesting. So actually, since you brought that up, let me just ask you. I was going to bring it up later, but can you tell us what your account of it is before I start nitpicking about this particular issue?
Okay, good. So amodal completion is a fancy word for this amazing thing that our visual system does, that it represents occluded parts of perceived objects. So you see me only from the shoulder up, but your perceptual system is coming up with all kinds of representation about how this stuff is continuing like this. And if I do this, then your perceptual system is going to represent the tip of these four fingers of mine. So that's just, it's the representation of occluded parts of perceived objects. And my view is that it's a form of mental imagery.
So, and on your view, what happens is like when I'm looking at the object, then there's a causal link between the stimulus and the perceptual processing on the retina, connecting to the LGN, connecting to the V1, etc. So that's all perceptual processing. But there's a middle part, or like the tip of your finger part, which is activated by that processing.
Well,
So they're
if
literally.
I do this, if I do this, I don't know which one. If I do this, then whatever is going to directly trigger the processing, the perceptual processing that corresponds to the representation of the tip of my fingers is clearly not the sensory stimulation coming from the tip of my fingers, because there is no sensory stimulation coming from the tip of my fingers.
Right. No, I
So
know, but
that'll be
it's
indirect.
so. But is it on your view? So there's two questions I have. One, is it on your view that this stimulation, which the processing, which is caused indirectly, is the same as which would have been caused had the tip of the finger been visible? So it is the state that's activated the same on your view? That's one question. And the second
Let me
question.
just answer that first.
Okay.
Well, ideally,
Okay.
but of course it can mislead us. So behind your head, good example. There's your office. Presumably that's not an artificial background,
It's
and
not.
I can see that there's a kind of a side of a computer screen. Yeah, exactly. There you go. My visual system amodally completes that. But it might be completely wrong, because obviously the visual system is trying to go with a model that's the closest approximation of what visual system can expect on the basis of all kinds of things that we've seen before.
Right.
But maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a kind of a half computer screen. It's just a broken half computer screen that's there as a decoration. That's completely consistent with the visual array that it gives us. So
Right.
yeah, so the aim completion can very much misrepresent,
But I
which is
mean,
good.
like,
Like
think about that,
representation.
like the famous finger case. I probably can't do it on the screen, but you know how you have the finger and you put an occluding thing in between and it looks like you have one long finger instead of
Yeah, yeah.
two fingers. Or you have the two horses and you put an occluding thing and it looks like one extremely long horse.
That's right.
So, on your view, then, the sense that it's an extremely long horse is accounted for by the fact that the visual system in early processing the is producing the state which would have occurred had the horse been visually that long. That's the question that I'm asking. Like, does so the horse seems extra long, and if I had seen a horse that long, then my visual processing would have been driven in a certain way. Is the way that actually long horse stimulus would have driven my visual system similar or the same on your view as the kind of processing that's produced indirectly in this mental imagery case.
Yes, similar or same. Very
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Very good. Excellent. Okay, so that makes it very clear, sort of, then what the empirical predictions would be on these kinds of cases. You would expect to find that. Okay, very cool. So that was just my first clarificatory question, which has been clarified. So the second thing that I was going to ask is, in the mental imagery case, when that processing is indirectly triggered, it can be triggered by many things, one assumes, top down and all sorts of things. But in the case of amodal completion, is it indirectly triggered by the processing which is produced by the stimulus that I'm seeing? Or is it produced by some top down expectation? Because I don't think I have top down expectations about long horses and things like that.
Yeah. So that varies. There's different forms of amodal completion. Sometimes your background knowledge has a big impact on amodal completion. For example, when I'm completing behind you the computer screen, right? I have some kind of an expectation about the shape of that thing. I would not have that if I had not been exposed to computer screens before. But and there's a lot of examples about how just there's very simple kind of dumb Gestalt principles that are at work in amodal completion. So it's both can happen, but neither of those are going to be direct. Neither of those would constitute an example of a perceptual representation that is directly triggered by the sensory input. Both of them would be indirect.
Right.
One of them would be direct because there's top-down stuff is going on. The other one would be indirect because other parts of the visual screen is going on, right?
So, and those are gonna not count as temporal mental imagery because they're
No.
gonna fall in the realm of the time frame of normal spreading of activity in the visual system.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm getting a clearer picture of what's going on here.
Yeah, I at some point I was wondering about whether I should say more about when I'm writing about temporal mental imagery, I should say more about the relation between spatial and temporal mental imagery, and clearly I should have.
No, it's
But
I mean it's just a cool, interesting topic, which made me have all these interesting
the
ideas.
book is long enough as it
Yeah,
is,
no
so
doubt. Yes, I'm not saying you should have added more stuff to the book. No, I'm not. But it's interesting to think about, because when I was reading that chapter, I was thinking, wait a minute, isn't like so okay? So now in some cases, though, you might think there are these sorts of things that do happen, and probably is compatible with your view. But the sort of thing I'm talking about are the like post-diction effects, whereby something happens afterwards that affects what you saw before. So where you have I don't know if you know the work of following Michel's work lately, but he has a paper on these kind of effects. And how they might pose a problem for first order representationalism and theories of consciousness or whatever. So that's a different sort of issue. But the question that I was kind of wondering about for you was, if these effects are, so if you present the stimulus and then 300 milliseconds later present something that affects how they perceive the stimulus, showing that
yeah,
there's this kind of long window there, then
yeah,
then sort of, I was thinking on your view, then what we're going to end up saying is that there's perceptual processing which triggers the mental imagery, and the mental imagery then changes the perceptual processing, or like how is that something that's allowable in your view?
So if that's kind of one claim that I want people to remember from this is that what we from the book is that what we naively take to be perception is really a mix, like a hybrid between, strictly speaking, perception, sensory stimulation driven perception, and mental imagery. And it's very true in the temporal imagery case as well. And that I argue that it helps us make sense of this very old discussion about, going back to William James, about how temporal experience is not a knife's edge, but it's a saddleback. So at any given time, so our experience of the temporally unfolding world in front of us is not like one snapshot after the other, but it has kind of temporal fan or something. So
Is this the
and
specious
I think that
present you're talking about?
exactly that's
Uh-huh.
exactly what it is.
Yeah.
That's the species present idea. So so yeah, so I think when I see anything, there's all kinds of things. So and actually, I mean, I have a nice little kind of saddleback there in the temporal imagery chapter, where I say that well, here's the saddleback, and
Mhm.
in the middle of the saddleback, that's the kind of sensory stimulation driven perception. But everything like that, what comes after and what came before, that's kind of filled in by mental imagery. And the further away you get from the middle point of the saddleback, the more the more the more important role mental imagery plays, temporal mental imagery plays, and the less important role the sensory stimulation plays.
Mhm.
In a similar way as with the peripheral vision, right? I mean, we know that for a long time that when I'm looking at you here in the middle of in my fovea, that would be sensory stimulation driven. But the further away we go in my periphery, the less sensory stimulation there is, or less information is being brought in, and our visual system is trying to somehow make up stuff that sounds like the most likely way of filling in those details.
Yes.
So in the same way, that would be the equivalent of that in the temporal case.
Uh-huh. So right, so
So
that's filling in you're talking about, and so I do want to get back to that, but you're not talking about filling in.
I mean, filling in, I think, is a terribly abused term.
I mean, for the blind spot, this is.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah.
Oh, all right,
Yeah. No,
let's circle
talk
back to
about
that.
it. Yeah. Okay.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't know I was going to trigger that reaction. Okay, cool. So, but the question
No,
that go ahead.
no, I don't have any problem with the filling in. It's just that I feel that kind of in the first wave of empirically informed philosophy of mind, they made a lot of filling in. Dennett wrote a lot about filling in, and there was I think what he meant when he talked about filling in, and that whole debate is really not what I care about. He cared about the experience in the
Mhm.
conscious. I don't care about the experience. I care about what's going on in the primary visual cortex. But we
Right.
can come back to
Right, I see what you're talking. I see, because you might assume that what you're talking about is like, why don't I see a hole? And what
exactly,
you're talking
exactly.
about is why isn't early visual processing affected
That's
in a certain
exactly.
way? Right. Yeah. Okay.
That was my
Interesting.
reaction. That was all my reaction. Okay, no, nothing else.
You really do don't like consciousness. I'm getting.
No, I know. I love consciousness. Being conscious is fun.
Being
Being
conscious
unconscious
is
is
fun.
not
I
fun.
agree. Being unconscious
Uh,
might be fun if you were conscious and could know about it. But back to this question that I was trying to. Well, now I might have lost what I was working towards, but um, the yes. So the question that I was trying to get at was where. Well, maybe I'm bringing consciousness into this in a way that you don't want to, but where in this process the first is the representational state, or maybe it's even wrong to think that there is one of the object, and which is the one that the visual system cares about, because if I'm like having some effect on my perceptual system that happened after the event was perceived, then the mental imagery, you're saying that a lot of what we take as our perceptual thing is like a mix of those two. But I'm asking, does it change? Does that mental imagery feed back on or affect the early perceptual processing in a way that would bring the early perceptual processing into a different state, or correct some details, or bring it more in alignment with or what? So in other words, like, what do you think the
yeah,
relation back and forth is, cause and effect wise?
good. So I think that the empirical research on the temporal case is not as advanced
Okay.
as in the spatial case, which is amodal completion.
Right.
And in the case of amodal completion, I mean, that's just the best thing to study, right? I mean, it's right there, close to the skull. It's very like it's the vision scientist's dream. But in that case, it's what our visual system cares about, and what us as organisms care about is not just what happens to be visible of the tiger. It's the whole goddamn tiger, right? And if you complete the tiger amodally well, then you're probably going to live. If you don't complete it well, then you're probably going to die. So it's very important.
Hmm.
But what this end result of this kind of perceptual object that your visual system comes up with is, it's a collaboration between sensory stimulation driven processes and mental imagery. And mental imagery is very important there. And mental imagery, what's happening in this kind of mental imagery processing, so processing that's not directly triggered by the sensory input, can and does impact the sensory stimulation driven stuff,
Okay.
at least in the case of amodal completion. Again, I think that we have much less information about the temporal case.
So would you switch to something like if you talk about the hollow face illusion or something like that, and you sort of think about how people perceive the faces being like convex when it's concave, but yet if you ask them to like flick the tip of the nose or touch it or something like that, they sort of reach into the mask where the nose is actually located, indicating that the perceptual system did correctly figure out where the surfaces were at least. But that's not some. There's also another perceptual representation somewhere which is related to the way the face is perceived consciously. So whether it's conscious or not, I don't really care because that might occur unconsciously too. But there clearly are these two different representations, right, that are both driven by the stimulus and involve imagery. And so how do we make sense of those kinds of phenomenon on this view? I know I'm switching topics all of a sudden, but I think it's a segue to what I'm trying to get at.
No, that's also very close to my heart, this topic, although I'm not sure it's about imagery, frankly. So it's about how, and that's a topic that I worked on a while ago, and that's about how the dorsal representation and the ventral representation they can come apart. That's what's happening in the holoface illusion, right? You have a
Right.
ventral representation, so yeah, so in the brain, after the prime visual cortex, there's two separate routes of processing, the ventral and the dorsal. The ventral is about recognition and awareness, consciousness. The dorsal is about action guidance. And then they can come apart, and they do come apart in the case of some optical illusions, like the holoface, also kinds of other optical illusions, Miller-Lyer. And I use that to understand picture perception. Because of picture perception, we have this really weird phenomenon. So you're all, dear audience, you're all looking at pictures at the moment, and when you're looking at the picture, then you seem to be seeing two different kinds of things. You see a three-dimensional, these two dudes, three-dimensional characters, but you also see these two-dimensional rectangles with weird kind of shapes on it. So one huge question in psychology, and I guess in some branches of philosophy, is how does that work? How is that possible for your visual system to represent these two things at the same time? Something two-dimensional, the surface, and something three-dimensional, the depicted scene. Big, huge question, and I have this account that, well, one of them is dorsal representation and the other is ventral representation.
Okay.
So the dorsal represent the surface, and the ventral represent the depicted scene. And I
Interesting.
think there's a lot of predictions about trompe-l'oeil and about various weird kind of pictures that I think confirms this view. But of course, I would think that.
So the dorsal stream goes from the early visual processing up through to the motor cortex and the basic dorsally obviously, and the ventral stream goes over here to the temporal lobes.
Yeah.
So as those streams trace out from the early visual areas, they cease to become imagery on your view, right? So I'm just trying to think through like how on your view this is going to work. So you have
Okay.
a you
So,
have
so again,
go ahead.
no, go ahead. So I feel that this. So
You're
that's a
going to say
view
you
that
don't
is like
care, huh?
no, no. I think that so the way I think about it is that in both of those cases, both of them are perception. So both of them, in both dorsal processing and ventral processing, imagery is going to play a big important role. And there's some literature on dorsal imagery, not a
Okay.
lot, not very good, but some literature on that. Obviously, most of the discussion is about ventral stuff. But so I want to say that yeah, imagery plays a role in all forms of perception, including dorsal and ventral. But just your initial question or initial example about the holoface, I don't think we need any kind of imagery in order to understand what's going on there.
Okay, so
It's
that's what
it's
I'm
just
trying
like,
to get at is that I'm wondering why you say that. That's what I'm getting. That's
oh, okay.
ultimately what I'm. Maybe maybe what I think you should say is that you don't need visual imagery, but you will need motor imagery, right, or something, in order to reach out and touch the nose where it really is, or something like that. So that's kind of what I'm aiming towards is like where do these connect
Mm,
in this process of explaining how I perceive it differently than how I act. Because they both depend on this perceptual stream. So part of the answer is that there's these different streams, they branch. But so as we follow the stream out, then what was imagery is now, the signal is going up through the process as it's coming up here to the parietal lobe, and the synapses are sending information, whatever's happening. Then that process is not imagery on your view, although it's causing you know representations in my somatosensory cortex, motor cortex, et cetera, to be produced at that point, right? And that's got to be part of the explanation for why I act the way I do when they say
yeah,
reach out and touch the nose. So at
yeah.
that point, some kind of unconscious imagery or something like that but motor imagery is being activated. But does it also activate a kind of visual imagery, because I'm also thinking that you have these passages where you say you reach for the cup, and there's like visual imagery of the cup involved in that. So I'm just wondering, like you say, it doesn't play a role in this case, but I'm thinking, doesn't it, on your view, like in these two instances, at least come into account when you explain how it is that a person can act in this way? And that's not even accounting for like how they perceive the thing consciously, but just like why they touch the nose correctly.
It's super exciting questions, and there's a lot to talk about. It.
Okay.
So let's just simplify it and from holoface, just going, touching the camera.
Okay.
Uh, so touching the camera, that's a perceptually guided action, right? And as the perceptually guided action, I'm not sure when it relies on imagery very much. It relies on imagery in the sense that any kind of perception, in my view, is part imagery. And I could touch the camera even if it were occluded by a curtain or something like that. I would know, I would know how to do that.
Right.
And I can also touch the camera if I close my eye. So that would be imagery. If I close my eyes and I touch the camera. Did I do this? Yeah, I did this.
You missed.
So that what?
You missed.
I missed that one. This is in the ballpark. So that would be what I call pragmatic mental imagery, right?
Right.
So that would be a perceptual guided action where it's which is not guided by perceptually guided, but it's not guided by the actual stimulus, but it's guided by a imagery, the perceptual representation. That's an imagery.
Right.
Uh, and you can do it in all kinds of ways, right? I mean, so it's quite easy to touch the camera if it's right here because I can. It's an on, as the action unfolds, there's a kind of an ongoing feedback to, where my finger is. If it's too much up, further up, then I'm gonna pull it down and so on. When it comes to acting on imagery, then it's gonna be a little less reliable. And again, I could just, look at it where it is, close my eyes, and then I do it like this. But you can also guide my pointing movement by just somehow telling me that the camera is I don't know at the upper right corner of my visual field, and then I'm going to
Yeah.
to try to reach that, and that would be very much pragmatic mental imagery. So a perceptually guided action that's guided not by like a straightforward online perceptual representation, but an offline perceptual representation.
So, and
But
that's why in the hollow face, you're going to say they're looking at it, so it's not offline.
exactly. So exactly. So I don't think that imagery plays any like a bigger role than in any other cases of perception.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
Right. Okay. And then so the difference between the perceptual representation in the dorsal stream and the perceptual representation in the ventral stream is going to ultimately account for like these. So one is accurately representing where the nose is, and the other isn't. Basically, is what
Yes,
you're saying.
that's my explanation. Um, I should say, so I kind of checked out of that literature. So I wrote a lot about these things in my first book called Bits of Perception and Action. But there's been some research that seems like it's not, I mean,
They're not so
it
separate.
exactly. So the
Yeah.
original account was that, there's the dorsal and the ventral, and it's just different. But apparently, there's a lot of interactions between them early on, and sometimes difficult to separate them.
Okay.
Huge
Yeah.
plasticity thing. So it's messier than it first seemed, which is always the case with the brain, unfortunately.
Okay. So your claim then that a lot of actions involve motor imagery is really more based on these like these ones that involve visualization and that aren't but you could have them about the same time though, right?
So that would be pragmatic math. So sorry, there's so
I know
many
there's a lot of
different.
distinctions. I'm messing them up.
So that's
Sorry.
pragmatic mental imagery. Motor imagery is something completely different for me.
Okay.
Motor imagery is the kind of the action counterpart of mental imagery. By mental imagery, I mean sensory imagery, and that's kind of on the input end of things. And what I mean by motor imagery, and that's also what the cognitive neuroscience of action, people working in the cognitive neuroscience of action, and one of my heroes is Mark Jonero, worked a lot on this.
Right.
And that's on the output side of things. So the way to think about it is, so here's a very simplified version of simplified way of thinking about sensory imagery. So what I call mental imagery. So sensory imagery is the kind of the first stop after the input in your perceptual processing that is not directly triggered by the input. And then go to the other side, to the output side. Motor imagery is the last stop in the kind of production of the output that does not directly produce the output.
That
And
does not directly produce the output.
yeah,
So there's always
have
mental
motor
image.
imagery and not act, right?
There's always motor imagery in every action.
No, what I'm saying is that there's no motor imagery it's possible to have motor imagery and not act. I now have motor imagery of touching that camera, but I'm not doing it.
Uh-huh, right, exactly. So it's the last stop in the sense of it's what would have happened right before the action was produced, but the action's
Exactly.
not produced.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
so that's the important part is that the action is not produced. Because I think I was misunderstanding that because I was sort of thinking that it's just the last stop before the action's produced, whether the action's produced or not. So that the imagery is always that kind of last stop before. And I guess what I was thinking, I now realize I'm wrong, but the kind of picture I had was that maybe in the motor cortex or something like that, you're having these motor imagery things, which are at the output, which then gets translated to the motor neurons in the spinal cord, just as to direct muscle commands. But that what's doing the commanding, so to speak, are these output motor images. But I'm now seeing that I was importing some other mystical view that's not yours to your book.
That's cool. No, I mean, I think so. I wrote relatively little about this in this book. I had an earlier paper about motor imagery and how and impact on action initiation. Because, yeah, so you can have motor imagery and not have action initiation, but having motor imagery highly improves the probability of action initiation, and in a way that's just really weird. It kind of lifts inhibitions in the spinal cord and stuff. It's really odd stuff. So I think that has huge impact on various questions in philosophy of action that obviously I didn't really want to dig into in this book.
Okay. Yeah, so that's why I was thinking there was motor imagery involved in the touching of the hollow face illusion thing. But now I'm seeing no, it's not because it results in the action precisely. But I wonder if they're so when the people are surprised that they touch the nose correctly,
Mhm.
which is the fun thing about it is that they are surprised. They go, "Oh, the nose seems like
Yeah.
it's here," but I just like, whoa. So at that point, it does seem to me that maybe they were forming a different motor image or something that they expected themselves to move in a different way. That they expected their hand would have touched where the nose seemed to be, or so. There does seem to be some sort of background thing that's violated. And I was wondering if that other, now that I know this is in the dorsal stream, or that other component of this hollow face illusion, if that might involve some sort of like illusion of that could be related to motor imagery in this way.
Hmm. Interesting.
Not necessarily in your strict definition of it's the last
Yeah.
stop, but in the sense of like there's a sense that you should have moved in a certain way that you didn't. So maybe that's a kind of mental imagery. Whether what specific branch it falls under, I don't know. But yeah, I wonder what you thought about that.
Good. I mean, I should say that I don't think of my concept of motor imagery as particularly controversial either, or very different from. So, I mean, if you define motor imagery in terms of consciousness, like, the the feeling of imagining doing something, something like that, that automatically implies motor imagery in my sense. But
Mm-hmm.
my concept is wider. So, in the same way as my concept of mental imagery is wider than just the feeling of being conscious of visualizing something, right?
Right.
So, right. So the question of about the surprise. I mean, I actually think it's an interesting question. Why we are surprised by that, and it has to do with. I mean, I think again, I don't think that you need motor imagery to explain this. As long as you think that it's just there's a conflict there between two perceptual representations, the ventral one and the dorsal one.
Okay.
You act on the dorsal one, you do something that goes against your ventral representation, which is the conscious one. You do it, and like, my God, that's not what my conscious part of my mind expected on the basis of the ventral representation.
Okay.
But it's clearly successful. It's clearly somehow it's tracking something. So that's maybe that's all there is to it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, what got me thinking about all this stuff was your discussion of cognitive dissonance and implicit
Mm.
bias and all of these things,
Yeah, yeah,
and the
yeah, yeah.
Stroop test, which a lot of people interpret as these more cognitive things, which you argue are based that importantly involve mental imagery. So that's what made me start thinking about these things. But yeah, I
Mhm.
think I see how you would like want to not say those kind of things now.
So now I'm kind of not delivering on that. So at the beginning we started by saying that I said in the appendix that
Yeah, I know that
it must be
everything
so annoying
exactly.
that everything is related to mental imagery. But now I'm like you kind of throw me these things that are all mental imagery, and I'm saying no, that's not the
Exactly.
case.
And that's why I was like, yes. So it was. We shouldn't be annoyed. We were unjustly annoyed. You've been wronged.
Oh well. Okay.
We'll apologize. Okay. So interesting. Yeah. Um, now, so I did just bring. I did just bring up these other things, which I wanted to also ask you about, like the
Mhm.
cognitive dissonance, the Stroop test, and these various things. So now I guess I don't know which one you prefer to start with, but I guess I was going to ask next about cognitive dissonance because this is something I think is very interesting, and this is an area where this theory of cognitive dissonance has been around for a long time. The ideas behind it, go way back to the '60s, possibly maybe the '70s, but '60s, depending on who you talk to, these ideas. I guess what Ledoux was telling me that they were influenced by the theory of cognitive dissonance when they were doing the split brain research back in the old days with. Anyway, so it's been around for a long time. And as the name suggests, people think it's cognitive. So that suggests that maybe there's a conflict in my beliefs, so that if in the example you discussed, I try to join a group, I have to be shocked in order to join it. And the more I'm shocked, the more severe the shock, the more loyal or the more higher I rate the group as being important to be a member of or something like that. So there seems to be this the classic explanation is like I just can't hold these two beliefs that the group is unimportant and that I suffered so much to be a part of it. So I have to adjust my beliefs that the group is important in order to fit. Maybe with core beliefs, if you want to, take the Mandelbaum route and Quilty Dunn route. Okay, so you know all this stuff. But so you think that there's kind of first something wrong with this approach, that it doesn't really explain what it's supposed to or work in the way it's supposed to. And then you have a mental imagery alternative. So, having set all that up, could you tell us, like, where did I get the setup right? If not, how did I mess up? And if I
Absolutely.
did, then
Absolutely.
what's wrong
Absolutely.
with it? And on your view, what's the argument against it?
But so here's another thing that I think might be a kind of a take home from reading the book. People have talked too much about cognitive states in trying to describe the human mind, about beliefs. Uh, I'm a little allergic to belief. I feel that we often postulate beliefs only because that's kind of a mental state type that we're comfortable in using, and there's no real reason why we would want to postulate beliefs, and we should postulate something much simpler, like imagistic representations. Yeah, but I mean, maybe this is a good place to vent about these things.
Yeah.
So I feel that when philosophy and kind of contemporary analytic philosophy of mind started, all those people who started it, they were coming from philosophy of language.
Yeah.
There's not one person in that tradition, with the exception of Krzyzewski, who, of course, is the only one who got this right, um, who who um, who are not coming from philosophy of language. So,
Yeah.
so all these people with philosophy of language background, they knew all about propositions. They just kind of imported that whole way of thinking about representations to the mind. And it's hardly a surprise that people were really somehow, as a default, people are thinking of mental representations as propositional representations, which is what beliefs are.
Right.
But if you drop that, then I don't think we have any kind of prior reasons to think of mental representations as a default to be cognitive or propositional representations. And I think that's kind of the cognitive dissonance literature is a very nice illustration of that. There's no real reason why we should think that it's all about beliefs. Why should it be about beliefs? Why are beliefs such important mental states? Uh, think about it. I mean,
Yeah. Can I just try one possible reply to that to see what you might say, which is that maybe there are certain types of theorists who want to have a unified account of the mind in terms of one kind of state, and maybe these people think information processing is an important component of cognitive science, and therefore maybe belief like states are going to be somehow fundamental. So you could work yourself into thinking a simple unified theory of the mind would just posit saying I agree with that, but I just wonder, like, is that is it just wrong to think that we could ever have an account of the mind in terms of one kind of mental state, or is that, you know?
I mean, I think it would be very unlikely that there would be. I mean, in general, I'm very skeptical of accounts of the mind that either go in for one kind of state or go in for one kind of one
But
for one
Bence,
way.
desires.
Yeah, those are.
So you like A
Sorry, I
leaves,
take it all back. I'm
desires?
gonna.
Yeah, exactly. You just never thought of that before, did you?
Um, no, so yeah, there's all these kinds of accounts that everything that goes on in the mind is X. Like how could that possibly be? Such a complicated system. There's interesting things going on in the perception and there's action and emotional stuff. Why would it be the same thing?
Right.
Um, and yeah, I mean the mind is somehow in right. So I mean one thing, there's two ways in which you can describe what I'm trying to do in this book. One of them is that I'm really trying to kind of push these simpler representations, imagistic representations that animals are very clearly capable of,
Right.
even quite simple animals are clearly capable of, and try to go as far as we can to explain the mind in those terms. And then if you absolutely can't succeed, then we can posit all this kind of linguistically structured fancy stuff, but only then. So in some sense, that's some kind of a unification, right?
Right.
We
Yeah, it is
try
actually.
to unify that, but what we should unify with is not is to try to understand those parts of our human mind, our human mental functioning that we share with animals, because we are animals, and much of what
Exactly.
we do is very similar to what animals are doing. So our default should not be to try to somehow liken everything that's going on in the human mind to I don't know, solving logic puzzles, right? Because that's not what the human mind is really good at.
Right.
In fact, the
Exactly.
human mind is really bad at that. What we
Exactly.
like at it is when the dog is sniffing another dog's butt.
Okay. Yes. Exactly. All right. Interesting. So besides the general, like, why should it be that way, you also have some specific objections to the kind of two beliefs. And here I'm thinking of like your objection to the Mandelbaum Quilty Dunn syllogism. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about set up that problem and why you think it doesn't succeed or doesn't work as an explanation.
Yeah. So I don't remember, to be honest. But so here's the problem. I actually am not sure I fully agree with what I said in that
Okay,
chapter.
then
Or
never
rather, I
mind.
know I do agree with what I say in that chapter, but I have an even better explanation
Okay.
in terms of what I call cognitive dissonance. So not cognitive dissonance, but cognitive dissonance. So the idea is that the conflict, so the original conflict is between two cognitive states, by which we can just mean two states with mind toward direction of fit. I think I'm not an idiot. I just, I don't know, endured electric shocks to join this group. How can I make this consistent? And then you can have that's the
Exactly.
um,
Well, you need one more premise that only an idiot would endure that if it wasn't worth something or something. Yeah.
so. And in the book, I'm saying that we don't need the beliefs. We don't need to do this in beliefs, but we should nonetheless do it in terms of imagistic representation that are still mind to world direction of fit representations. Um, Now I think that really what's going, or here's an even better explanation, uh, that it's really a conflict between a mind to world and a world to mind representations. So the world to mind is something like a bit the desire, a core desire. So instead of core beliefs, we have core desires.
Okay.
It's like a huge, big new project, so I'm not sure this is really the place to talk about it. But so because of that, I'm not super invested in what I say in the book because I feel I have a better angle on that.
Okay.
That's more
Yeah.
consistent with empirical findings.
Interesting.
But I
So
think
I'll be.
the belief,
Yeah, it'll be cool
not
to read that.
regardless of what you use in the old. So here's the original model. Cognitive dissonance is about one belief conflicting with another belief. In the book, I present one alternative. In this kind of new work, I present another alternative. I still think that there's issues with the original view, and there's a lot of, for example, it seems like in the case of cognitive dissonance, the dissonance it can be weakened if you kind of take out the primary visual cortex, if you flash the primary visual cortex
And like if
of the
you play
sub
music, I think too, you talk about right.
or play music.
Right.
Why would that be if
Right.
it were MIDI, right? So it's very, very difficult to explain if that had to do with brief. Here's another one which kind of ties into what we talked about earlier. There's fairly good evidence that there's cognitive dissonance in animals. So then again, you have this. I mean, but the belief people, the kind of eternal dilemma for the belief people. Are they going to say animals have beliefs or animals don't have beliefs? If they don't have beliefs, then it's going to be all kinds of problems. If they do have beliefs, then what is a belief then?
Right.
I, I yeah, I'm not
So
super happy with belief revival, to be honest.
yeah, I know that's interesting. So I don't. So since this isn't the place to talk about it, I won't bring up that other stuff. But I was very interested in the idea of cognitive dissonance that you mentioned. So I'll be
Send you the
looking.
paper. I'm very excited about that project.
Yeah, very cool. Okay. So then can I maybe this if this is one of those things this isn't the place to talk about then let me know. But can I ask if that you changed your mind you said it didn't fit with the empirical evidence. Was there some piece of empirical evidence you think specifically that got you to think of to search for an alternative view or some set of results or something that
Well, it's more like I'm really so the original in the book. What I'm doing is that there's a instead of the core belief. So in the quilted down Manenbaum model, there's a core belief that you have beliefs about yourself, that you're not an idiot, and so on. And that's a very important piece of the puzzle.
yeah.
And I say, maybe we don't have core beliefs. We have just this kind of core imagistic representations about ourselves. There's some way of relating to ourselves that's not mediated by this like very explicit beliefs, but some
Right.
kind of but if I wanted to be brutally intellectually honest, we don't have a shit ton of reason to attribute that. So, I think that the attribution of core beliefs and the same, those are kind of inherited by the attribution of this kind of core imagistic representation.
Interesting.
Whereas I think that core desires we have a much more solid case for attributing core desires to ourselves.
Very cool. Okay. Huh. All right. So now, since you're saying boo to your cognitive dissonance thing, I'll let that slide. I am curious about the Stroop effect. So I think
Yeah.
this is another area where you have interesting things to say. That imagery pops up where you wouldn't have expected it. At least not obviously. So the traditional view here is what Stroop effect is. You see the red it says green, but it's red ink, and then they ask you to name the color of the ink, and you go green. No, wait, red, and it takes you a little bit longer. So that's a reliable effect. It might be the most studied thing in psychophysics. I don't know if it is, but
At
it's
some
very
point it
well
was.
studied. So usually that's people say that if I understand the traditional textbook answer for what's going on, it's that you see the word and there's semantic processing of the word, which happens very fast and unconsciously. So that seeing the letters GREEN triggers the concept in my mind green, so that that cognitive state interferes with my visual perceptual state, which is representing it as red, so that when I try to say what color it is, the cognitive state somehow interjects or supersedes or gets in first or something like that. And you want to say, no, there's a better explanation that involves mental imagery, which is, I guess, that the word activates the mental image of green. Is that how this is going to go? And if so, then what happened to this semantic activation of processing, the so-called deep unconscious processing of the meaning of the term? Do you object to that, or does that not matter in the way they think it does, or just how does this all fit together? Is what I'm
Yeah.
asking.
So the way I see the mainstream explanation, and my alternative to that is that in the mainstream the explanation is about control. It's not a perceptual issue, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
about control. There's this, you see the stimulus, and then, you might, am I going to say green or am I going to say red? And these two things kind of compete in the kind of in the output end of things, right? When I'm trying to name the word. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
now what I'm saying is that no, you're slower, not because the perceptual processing is slower, but because the perceptual processing gives you whatever it is, and then it's like these two things kind of fighting with each other. Oh, I should say green. Oh, I should say red. Oh, I should say green. And that's what slows it down. So because what we're trying to explain is why it's slower, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas what I'm saying is not, I'm not saying that the whole control issue does not happen. What I'm saying is that besides that, or in some cases, in a much more important factor in the slowness of the reaction time, is that the perceptual processing is slower. And the perceptual processing is slower because you're looking at something red, whereas you have a green visual mental imagery because you're reading the word green, Green. And that's kind of big interference there in the perceptual case. So there's not just an action interference, but also, or sometimes even more importantly, a perceptual interference. I
Right.
don't really want to say that it's like, oh, the Stroop effect has nothing to do with control. It's just that there's a very important element there. There's already a conflict, already an interference in the perceptual processing.
So, with respect to the control issue, then what is the explanation for why no one ever says red? If it really is just a matter of these two things battling for control, these two informational states or representations, then you would expect
Some people do
sometimes.
say red, right? I mean, there's also accuracy. Accuracy also goes down with Stroop. Sometimes if you're not paying, especially if there's attentional load issues and stuff. You do say red sometimes, but people tend to pay attention to what the instruction is, and then they just kind of.
And so that's the top down. That's the control issue, is whether they can override by picking the one that they're instructed to do. Okay. So, and what you're saying is that maybe that's going on, but in addition, there's also this evidence that the imagery for green is activated. And I'm just wondering, like, can you sort of walk us through what this evidence is? Because that's a kind of surprising claim. One might think that you read the word green and then the neural state for green is activated or something like that. Um,
Oh, there's nothing surprising about that. There's a really strong case for that. I mean, this is something that maybe I should have made a bigger fuss about this, about just how intertwined linguistic and imagistic processing is in the
mhm.
human mind. I guess I do say a little bit about it in the language chapter, but labeling, just the mere labeling of something, really has a big, huge impact on perceptual processing and the speed of perceptual processing, accuracy of perceptual processing, and we know that just when you see the label, see the word green, then that is incredibly fast. That has an incredibly fast impact on that goes directly to the prime visual cortex of that, or V4. Actually, don't know for that. I think it goes V4.
Okay.
And then it creates imagery that goes along with that. So
Okay. Interesting. So then, then you would expect to be able to find that these two sort of cortically represent these two representations are competing in some sense.
yeah, there's a lot. I mean, so this is more of a, and I wrote, I before the book was published, I wrote a piece on this in Perception, which is an empirical journal. That this is really an empirical prediction. I mean, an
Yeah.
empirical hypothesis. It's not, I mean, it's a philosophical, interesting philosophical view, I guess, or a view that interesting philosophical implications with something that we thought had to do with control interference. It's actually perceptual interference, but it's really an empirical hypothesis, and
Exactly.
a little difficult to study what is going on in V4 uh, when you're staring at the word green, GRE, and
Yeah.
paint in red, but it might not be impossible to actually examine that. So,
Yeah. Exactly. And
and most
that's
of what I'm doing is really kind of that. It's empirical hypothesis. I'm not, I don't think that I'm gonna say the last word in any of these things, but I'm trying to say something that might be confirmed empirically and might help the empirical research.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the exciting part to me as well. That's what's interesting. I mean, there's many things that are interesting, but one of the things that I find very interesting about your work is that yes, that these you're really taking seriously the idea that these are empirical questions and trying to explore like what we would expect and what the explanations should look like and things of that nature. And
And am
this
I
is just
getting?
one book. Like you've written many books, by the way, way too many, someone might think. And you're currently writing more, so you might want to stop someday. Let us catch up.
But it's also, if you're doing this kind of this form of philosophy, this empirical grounded philosophy, you give a theoretical account on the basis of the available evidence.
Right.
People are not gonna stop writing empirical papers just because you kind of wrote your book. And
Exactly.
that was very, you really feel this with aphantasia, but
Exactly.
aphantasia really kind of started to take off when I published the book, and it's just even from the copy edited version to the proofs, there were like, you know
Exactly.
thousands of
Um,
articles that we could have talked about.
I mean, exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly where I wanted to kind of segue into was to talk about aphantasia. And aphantasia is something that's close to my personal heart because I have it. And
Really?
oh yeah, 100, yeah. So I didn't know that people were like serious about mental like images until I got to grad school. And we were talking about the problem of the speckled hen, and they were saying like imagine the speckled hen, like how many spots does it have in the mental image? And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like how many is, well, what? And there were people around me being like, no, I can tell there's 14, or what about the other side? And they were talking about asking these questions. I was just like, wait, are you guys seriously like talking about like a picture of a chicken in your mind?
It's very interesting because people with aphantasia, they tend to hate my stuff on imagery.
Oh no, I
Uh,
found it very interesting. Yeah. So, but you're very clear that like this could be unconscious. So I take seriously the idea that aphantasia could be unconscious imagery, because for example, when I was reading your section on aphantasia, you were talking about image guidance, and you were saying like grab. Maybe this wasn't on aphantasia. This may have been on motor imagery. But anyway, you were talking about reaching out to grab the coffee cup with your eyes closed, and you were saying that aphantasics can do that. Or you were saying you generate them. Maybe you didn't say that. Maybe I just proved that they could by doing it. But you were saying that the image could be unconscious. And so when I closed my eyes and I was like, okay, so where's the coffee cup? And I was like, all right, so I know where it is. I remember where I put it, and I reach out. In my mind, it's just complete blackness. Like what I'm seeing is literally just empty black nothingness. But I still grab the coffee cup. I still successfully, like my fingers were in the right position. I hooked the little thing, and it worked perfectly. So I perfectly accept that probably it could be that there's an image that was generated which was guiding my action without me being aware of it. Because from my point of view, I will swear up and down there was no image. There was, you know, nothing. It's like
Great, you're right. That's exactly the kind of aphantasia we need. Let me ask just a couple of aphantasia questions. Do you dream in images?
Yeah, I do dream, or at least I mean, I don't know. Once I found out I had aphantasia, I started wondering if I do dream in images. But I wake up under the impression that I dream in images. And if you're a dream skeptic, I don't know, maybe I don't, and then just wake up and kind of fill in the details. But it certainly like I, let's put it this way: I was convinced by Descartes' argument from
Okay.
dreaming before I ever knew about aphantasia or that I had it in any way at all. So that seems to me to suggest that I had dreams. And I have maybe auditory imagery, and I'm a musician, so maybe that explains, or quote,
If
quote,
you're a
quote,
musician, you probably do have auditory
quote,
imagery.
quote, musician,
Right.
quote, quote. So that might, yeah. So I do think someone once they said to me, like, I said, I can't tell sometimes if, like, when I'm trying to picture a song in my head, whether I'm hearing the song or I'm hearing like myself humming it in my own mental voice. Like, is it the guitar I'm hearing or me kind of going, John, 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 or whatever, in my head, but in a weird way?
That would be both auditory mental imagery. So
Exactly.
yeah.
But this person also said, well, can you hear chords? Because then it's probably not your voice. And I was like, yeah, okay, I can hear chords, I think. Um, but anyway, and I've gotten better since I've been learning how to play piano and really practicing triads and altered chords and things like that. It's really changed the way I hear. Like I can pick out an altered ninth chord now. I can spot it, and I couldn't before. So that's cool. And so that was what And then I read that maybe aphantasics don't hallucinate when they take LSD and stuff, and I was like, but I took all those mushrooms in the '90s, and I swear to God, I was hallucinating. So
Huge,
I
huge variations. Again, so I wrote one of my publications that I'm the most proud of, Trends in Cognitive Sciences, about the heterogeneity of aphantasia, that there's these giant variations.
exactly, and that's
And
what I'm
I don't
pushing
see one of
towards
them.
exactly. And I love that
I
paper,
don't
by
see
the
one of
way.
them. So some people have nothing, and some people have no problem with that. So here's my hypothesis: your aphantasia is a control issue. It's a prefrontal issue.
Hmm.
You have issues conjuring up your mental imagery, your visual imagery. You do have visual imagery, which is conscious. So I mean,
Which is conscious. Wait a minute, hold on.
no, no, no. So you can have non-voluntarily triggered conscious mental imagery. That's what you have in
Yes.
dreams.
Like when I
That's what you have.
meditate, for example, I see colors. And I was like, the first time that happened to me, I was freaked out. I was like, holy fuck, there's a purple spot in front of my face right now. And it like scared the shit out of me. Like, I'm not even joking. I was like, whoa. And then it amazed me. I was like, whoa, these colors are like morphing in front of my face right now. They're changing white into blue, into red, into purple. It blew my
Do you have
mind.
flashbacks?
And then I found out that's kind of a normal thing in meditation. But I thought as an aphantasic, there'd be no way that I could. And then I
So
read your
that's
paper.
not actually being not being studied at all. I think it should be because the LSD, the psychedelics that has been studied, and there's a big variation. I'm pretty sure that the same thing would go on in meditation
Interesting.
for reasons. Do you have flashbacks, visual flashbacks, like I don't
Tracers
know,
and stuff. Yeah.
what they get like no, like I don't know, you almost got hit by a car and then you later that
Oh
day
no.
you don't have that.
I don't really have
Because that
those.
would be like a rock solid evidence that it's a prefrontal issue. That's the problem is with the control of your imagery, and not that you don't have it at all. It's not that you're incapable of having mental imagery. You're not. You're not.
So basically, what you're saying is that for an aphantasic, like for the people that aren't up with us, I'm talking about this paper you mentioned in Trends in Cognitive Science, which is what you wrote about aphantasia, and basically the theme of your thing was that this is a new and interesting thing, but people treat it as though it's a uniform thing. When really we should just come to grips with the fact that there's like different kinds. It can be triggered in different ways. It may show up as a result of different things having gone wrong or whatever in the normal stream of perception. So what you're saying is for like someone like me who can dream but can't picture an apple in their head, that there's a control issue that I can generate imagery, but I can't voluntarily generate the image or
Exactly.
consciously generate it.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't conjure it up. That's how I put it.
But
You can
but
just
can I
almost
just stop you right there
visualize.
because this is why I was pressing towards this way, because it seems to me
Yeah.
that I have to be able to, because how else was I able, on your view, to reach for
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Right.
cup when I
So
closed my eyes and said, where is the cup? I was able to do it. So I must have conjured up some imagery because I waited 10 seconds, like you said. That's what you said to do, and that's what I did. So I put the cup down, I put my hands in my lap, I counted to 10, and then I tried to picture the cup. I saw blackness, and then I reached out and successfully grabbed the cup.
So I hope there was no hot beverage in the cup.
There was coffee, so a lot depended on this. But no, I reached gently towards the cup.
So yeah, so but that's where which is what I think. So the whole, aphantasia is heterogeneous. I kind of I pulled the strings together, but it's not such a revolutionary idea. On the other hand, the explanation of aphantasia in terms of unconscious mental imagery, that's I believe that was I was the first person who came up with that.
Oh, interesting.
I think that's what's going on in the case when you're reaching out for the cup. So I don't think that these are kind of exclusive explanations. That one of that, that one explanation is that your imagery is unconscious, and the other one would be that it's a control issue. It can be this. It can be both can be true.
Yeah. Okay. So I
But
got lots
yeah,
of
so
stuff
that's
going
the
wrong with me. You're saying thanks.
sorry.
I
Yeah,
said I got all
exactly.
kinds of things going wrong with
There's
me.
one thing wrong with you, Richard. You should know that.
No, and I don't like people thinking of aphantasia as a disorder. I know we're in the minority, but I don't feel like it's a disorder in the sense that I've never noticed it, so it can't. And I was in grad school and talking about consciousness, so it can't really be a disorder in the sense of affecting my ability to do things in the world. Like it just can't.
And
Um,
it's just stupid to think about it as a disorder. And
yeah.
also, if you have aphantasia, you're much better off in terms of mental health issues.
And I love reading too. And when I first started telling people that so in this philosophy of perception class that I'm talking about way back in the early, this was like 2001 or something like that, long time ago. So in that class, when I suddenly realized like these guys were serious about seeing something mental in like currently, and I was like, what the hell are you guys talking about? In that class where this came out, they were very surprised that as surprised as I was, that
Hmm.
they were seriously saying that they had some mental image. They were as surprised that I was saying I had no mental image. And we were both like, all of us sitting there being like, what? So it was a very eye opening moment where it really, in a way, I want to spin this for what we're talking about now, is that there is this assumption in the philosophy of perception, psychology, etc., that there's a uniformity here and that, that perception is a natural kind or something like that. And I don't know if it really should be thought of that way because there are all these variances that we're kind of sweeping under the rug, where that clearly don't make a behavioral difference because I drive a car just as well as everyone else, and everyone says I have a great imagination and I love reading and all this stuff, and then they go, well, you like reading? Like, what do you do when you read? And I'm like, I don't know, understand the story and enjoy it. Like you read it. Like, what do you mean? And
Yeah.
they're like, but you don't have a picture in your head of what the guy looks like. I'm like, I don't know. I'm still surprised when I see the actor and I'm like, oh, that's not what I would have thought. But when I say that, I don't have a like face in my consciousness going, oh, it should have been not Brad Pitt. So it is kind of an
Isn't it
interesting.
exactly like what you would expect from unconscious mental imagery that you form some kind of an unconscious representation, and then the way to know that you had an unconscious representation is that if you see something that you would have thought is the same, you're surprised because that's not actually the same. So
Hmm.
surprise that, oh, that's not how I imagined it or something. That's a surprising look. It wouldn't be a surprising look if you had not no visual representation of it of some
Exactly.
form or something.
That's why I've
So
always
that would
taken
be
this unconscious mental imagery stuff to be sort of obvious in a way. And I mean, before aphantasia, when people, because I remember when I first kind of came to New York as a philosopher grad student, and Ned seemed to be arguing against people like David Rosenthal, high order theorists, who were
mm,
suggesting that there might be unconscious imagistic representations. And it seemed
mm,
like people like Ned were saying, no, if it's imagistic, it has to be conscious in some sense. And that the whole idea of like images that are not conscious doesn't make sense in some conceptual way. And I was just like, I don't know. It seems like obvious to me, but maybe that's because I have this kind of
yeah.
already. I can lean on things which yeah, I was just already convinced that there could be imagistic things that I was unaware of in my own mind in a way.
Yeah,
That
you're
that
like perfect. You're the perfect aphantasia for my purposes.
oh,
So
cool! I didn't know
a couple of things.
that.
A couple of things. One is that so you said that there's all this, it's not a disorder. There's all this kind of big, huge differences, interpersonal differences.
Yeah.
I think that's the future in psychology. That and there's more and more really cool results about how things that we thought is like this one way of working, visual working memory. No, visual working memory is not one thing in terms of just neural implementation. There's like three completely different ways in which it can
Right.
work. Different people are gonna and they use it differently. So
Exactly.
I feel that that's a huge thing, and I think aphantasia is a very good kind of playground for figuring that out because that's clearly a very good match for that. But there's some other, in some sense, your aphantasia is probably less impacting of your life than some other people. So, for
Yeah.
example, you do aimless completion, right? This
Oh
is not a
yeah.
problem.
But I don't feel
There's some,
like I consciously see the parts that are missing. I just feel like there's something there, like, and that's unconscious.
so there's this. So if there's a horse, I don't know, and there's this one tiny little, I don't know, tree in the middle, you don't think that it's two different horses, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
there are people with aphantasia that do,
Oh,
and
really?
it's yeah. So did you know uh, Anand Vadia before he died? He had aphantasia, and
I know of him, but I didn't know him personally. I know it's very sad that he
he had
died
this
though.
weird kind of strong aphantasia that is just really like none of those optical illusions they just didn't work on him because
Interesting.
they and as a giant variation. So I think
And I know people like Bryce, like I don't know if you know Bryce Hubner, but he has a way more severe form of aphantasia than no even
I'm not sure.
auditory. He doesn't dream, none of that stuff.
I'm not sure we should say severe, right? Because that again sounds
Right.
like
Oh, sorry. I know. Eef. Well, a more, yeah,
yeah.
a fuller version
But
of
it's
it.
also, I mean, and one thing that kind of irks me about the whole aphantasia thing is that the way it's discussed is that, oh, well, there's the normal ones in the middle, and then there's aphantasia, 5%.
Right.
Doesn't really important. There's hyperphantasia on the other end of the spectrum. Very not important. That's really not the way it is. The way it is that everyone is somewhere here, and I'm fairly close to the hyperphantasia thing, and I just a lot of problems with that, and it's not the case that there's the normals and
Right.
then there's the weird things in here. Everyone is weird, right?
Yeah,
Everyone is weird, and
exactly.
people make decisions very different among the normal people in the middle. People
Right.
make decisions very differently depending on whether they're closer to the hyperphantasia spectrum or the aphantasia spectrum.
Ah,
People read differently. Their experiences of reading is different as well,
right.
and so on. It's a giant like much of what we care about is going to work very differently depending on where we are in this spectrum, in the part of the spectrum that you would want to describe as normal. So
So you're, I mean, what I'm hearing you say is that a future direction for psychological research and science generally is to emphasize the heterogeneity of these psychological processes and the way that individuals are. So maybe methodological solipsism as a kind of, paradigm of the way we should do the science of the mind is going to fall to the side as a result of this.
yeah, like all of us, right?
Yeah,
So
no, not like Olive for no, huh? No, I don't know. Language of thought for the win.
yeah,
That's a
sorry, I
separate
forgot.
topic. All right,
Yeah.
fine. We'll fight about
What
that
is that
on
called
a
for?
different day. I'm realizing it's already almost 1 o'clock. I know I can't keep you
Yeah, shoot.
forever. You've been very patient. We barely scratched the surface. There's a trillion million things. But since we are supposed to be talking about consciousness, I
Yes.
do kind of want to bring things around to talking about this intentionalism paper that you
Yeah.
have that's come out, and maybe this is a good place to kind of bring some things that we've been talking about together. Because in that paper, what you guys want to target is this idea, because I like representationalism, and in many ways, I see my own work as trying to take higher order theories of consciousness and turn them into proper representational theories, so they can fit with like what everyone else is doing, which I don't think has been done. But that's a separate topic. So, but anyway, my point is that I like representationalism.
By representationism, you mean what I mean by intentionalism, right? So,
Yes,
phenomenology supervening on content.
yes. So you call it intentionalism, probably because you want to maintain the idea that there's lots of representations that don't play this role. or have anything to do with like perceptual content or phenomenology.
That's a mess. That's really like it's really kind of 50-50% of philosophers. Like some of them call them intentionalism, other people call them representationalism. It's very we should agree on one terminology or the other and not just go, go with that.
Exactly. Well, I don't like the word intentional
Yeah.
because there's too many
Oh,
intentionals, like intentionality,
yeah,
intentional,
yeah, no, you're right.
intention.
Yeah, but then there's so many representationalisms, right? I mean, the representation. I mean, in philosophy of perception, that's a big thing, right? You know,
Yeah.
the capture representation. So, anyway, so what we're talking about is the view that phenomenology supervenes on content,
And by phenomenology, can we agree that we mean
perceptual phenomenology.
no, but consciousness?
Yes.
Yeah. So what it's like and all that stuff. Phenomenal consciousness.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. So sometimes people want to, not say stuff
I
like
know.
that. So, all right. So good. So intentionalism is the view that the content of your phenomenology supervenes on some propositional intentional state. Go ahead.
What?
You're
Say it again.
saying something. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I thought that you it was the other way around.
Okay. That the
Intentionalism
propositional
for what?
content supervenes on the. So just tell me what you take intentionalism to be. That's all I'm trying to get at.
Intentionalism is the I take to be intentional. I think is what you mean by representationalism, and that's that perceptual phenomenology supervenes on perceptual content.
Yeah, okay, good. So the first question is I want to really kind of press you on this supervenience talk because I don't really like it. And I don't think supervenience has ever done anyone any favors. And if it doesn't mean identity, then I don't think it really means anything, which would metaphysically distinguish it from dualism, property dualism, epiphenomenalism, etc. So I wonder, like, do you guys say that just because you're trying to be, get everybody, or do you really think that something is important about supervenience?
I mean,
I know it's a big
I am of
topic, but
the
just yes or no,
generation.
right now, quick. No, just kidding.
I'm of the generation that when I was an undergrad, then supervenience was all the rage. So it's sad but true. It really makes
I mean, I
makes
lived
me
through
feel.
those supervenience wars too, but I just always felt very dissatisfied because I was like, if they're not talking about identity, then they're just not talking about anything. Like, what are we talking about? You can't have a difference in B's without difference in A's. Like, so what? Like, what is that? That's like, it's not telling me anything about the metaphysical relationship that exists between these sets of properties. So it sort of seems like, so you were saying, oh, it's naturalism and we want to be naturalists. And what we want to do is first we say
Okay,
there's
okay,
break,
okay. What I really care about is
go
what I
ahead.
really care about is explanation, right? But you can explain one thing in terms of another thing. Supervenience, really not a sufficient condition. You're absolutely right. Necessary condition.
Okay.
So that's a good and that is what we want to be caring about. What I really dislike is those views that are denying the supervenience
I
claim.
see. Okay. Uh-huh.
So and you're right that we should be aiming at something much better, much stronger than supervenience claim. But we lost, half the profession. Who are, or I don't know, what's the
Half.
percentage?
Wait, you mean the panpsychists? No, no, they're like 20%, 15%.
15%.
Sure.
But
I already lost a bet to David Chalmers on this once. I'm not picking a number again. But yes, there's not half. I know it's not half.
there's the phenomenal intentionality people. There's
Oh
a bunch
yeah.
of people that are going. So I feel that we should make a strong case for some kind of even weak relation between phenomenology and content,
I
and then
see.
we can work from there on. And that's the aim, that's the dream. But I want to have the other people on board as well, because more people think about the question, the better the chances are that we're going to be able to come up with something.
I mean, the way
So,
you
and
know
I,
is suspect though is that like Chalmers could agree with the supervenience claim, and so could I. And I'm an identity theorist, and he's a whoever not physicalist. So you know,
yeah, yeah, no, fair enough. But I feel that anyone should. So, all right. So the view in this paper is that the the way the most convincing way of thinking about intentionalism, or what you would call representationalism, is that it's not that phenomenal character perceptual phenomenology it supervenes on the content of this one representation, but it supervenes on the sum of the content of a bunch of perceptual representations
right?
in all kinds of modalities and all kinds of levels of processing, um, and that's that's the view. And I feel that everyone should agree with that.
Yeah.
I feel that
Oh no, that a bunch I agree with. I'm just talking about supervenience, and I'm like gonna be like,
right, right,
you
right, right. So,
basically
so
could have said grounding, and it would have been the same, and that's just as BS. And like, isn't this kind of just like a not serious word?
again, I don't think that should be like the last word in this kinds of debates, and I don't think that's a good explanation of consciousness. But I think it's a kind of a bare minimum from which you can build towards a good explanation of
I see.
consciousness. Because what I really care about is explaining complex things in terms of simpler things,
Right.
and
And that I agree with. So I'm not taking the issue with that. Yeah, I see what you're saying, and so in put that way, I could agree. Okay, cool. So what you guys are trying to argue against is what you call one-to-one intentionalism. So basically, the idea would be that I have this conscious phenomenology, and that then that would supervene or correlate with one particular representation. Which, when you put it that way, it sounds super sus already. It sounds very suspicious. But lots of people have this view, and you give all the quotes, like you guys say, we're not making this up. Like people go around saying this.
including one from my earlier
Yeah,
times.
exactly. So this is definitely like the way people talk, and your argument is no, this just is at odds with the way perceptual science works. There's lots of representations all over the place, spatially different, temporally different, lots of different. So there's no real reason to think that they come together in one what you call a summary representation, which would be the alternative. So then, just empirically, it looks like we're being pressed towards this idea that it's got to be somehow distributed over all these, or I didn't quite get the sum idea. But somehow it's the summation of all these representational properties. That's the basic
Yeah,
picture,
so I mean,
right?
you can see how that's a kind of a very different, very similar picture, like very like big picture view of the mind as what I'm going in for the with the mental imagery thing.
Right.
Is that it's uh in the mental imagery project, there's the perceptual representation, mental imagery, various mental, the temporal imagery, various spatial imagery representation, and then on the basis of that, you get what you naively think of as perception.
Right.
And here as well, you get all these kinds of different representation across the visual stream, across the auditory stream, and then all together they come together and they kind of create the conscious feel that you have.
So the most obvious and immediate question that jumps out from me after reading all of this stuff juxtaposed and having this discussion is, given that you're committed to these unconscious mental imageries, which are representational and blah, 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 those unconscious ones, one assumes, are not in the supervenient space of the perceptual experience that I have, right? Or are they? So that's the question ultimately that I have.
Yes,
Is
very much.
and so they are. You're saying yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're not
So
unconscious then, or like in what sense? Like, see, this is what I'm wondering here. Is
So many of those representations that are in the supervenience base of our perceptual phenomenology are going to be unconscious.
in what
That doesn't
sense
mean that they
though?
can't help, can't have an impact or on the content or on on the phenomenal character,
But
right?
how?
So
Wait, but hold on. Yes, it does sometimes, unless you're saying that they have an impact by creating a difference in some summary state or some other further state downstream. How would they have a difference if they're unconscious?
um,
How would they make a difference? Sorry.
they have clearly some kind of a causal impact. I mean, it's not, I mean, you seem to assume that anything that can possibly influence our consciousness are only like other conscious states. Is that the idea? That something that
No,
is
I'm not
unconscious?
assuming anything. Or I hope I'm not. I'm trying to figure out on your view, since you seem to, on the one hand, suggest that you can have unconscious representations, but also conscious ones.
Yeah.
That there are representations which you don't experience and ones which you do. But at the same
Yeah.
time, you're making an argument that the ones you do consciously experience supervene on many different representations. And so what I'm asking is, do they supervene also on the unconscious ones? Because you might have thought that no, you could change those without changing my experience. Unless you change causally something in the state, which is, you know, the experience. So how could it causally change something unless you're saying it's not physical, but you're saying you're a naturalist or you want to reduce it to. So I'm really confused about how all this, these two, and maybe you didn't mean for them to fit together because they're separate projects, but I was trying to fit these two together. The idea that there's unconscious mental images and also the idea that my conscious experience supervenes on many different representations. So how do we tell them apart? Or are they all in there? Or like, yeah, so how is it all fitting together ultimately?
So I mean, the supervenience relation is that you can't change the supervenient stuff without there being a change in the subvenient one, right?
Right.
Um, so it doesn't mean that any kind of so that seems to be very consistent with there being unconscious representations in the supervenience base. Uh, and the way I think about it is that, all right, so here's like a really dumb parallel. Really, what's going on in your skulls is a bunch of neurons, and your conscious phenomenology is in some sense supervenes on the the neurons, whatever the neurons are doing. None of those are conscious. Let's just hope. Let's just imagine. It's still a supervenience thing.
Yeah.
I think that's not going to be an easy explanatory gap to bridge. So let's go somewhere in the middle. Let's have a kind of an intermediary step. Representations, some which are conscious, some which are not conscious. We understand a fair amount about how to get from neurons to these representations, especially in early cortical stuff. So we already make some progress,
Right.
and then we can have the kind of them as a supervenience base.
Right. But so let me try one more time and I'll make it simpler, hopefully. Don't you need something which would answer the question, what makes the unconscious ones conscious? Besides simply saying there's a supervenience relationship. Like there's got to be some explanation for the difference between the two. And it doesn't seem like, and intentionalism is usually supposed to be the answer to that question. There's a kind of representational
Okay.
content that supervenes only. So, but you can't say that. So this is why I'm wondering.
Okay, good, good, good. So what? All right. So this is not gonna be. I'm not gonna explain. This is not a theory of consciousness. Okay.
Okay. But
I think that's what you're.
intentionalism, okay.
I don't think intentionalism is a theory of consciousness, to be honest. Intentionalism is a somewhat hand-wavy view about the relation between content and consciousness.
Okay.
It's a promise of a theory of consciousness, isn't it? Or this is the general region where the theory of consciousness is going to be, but it's not a theory of consciousness. And you're absolutely, I mean, that was kind of your first question about this, about supervenience. No, it's not.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna, this is not gonna tell you what's what makes something conscious.
Okay. All right. Because
Nor,
I was reading it as trying to answer that question, which was getting me in the problem that I just had. Yeah.
nor am I super interested in that question.
Yeah, I can tell. And I also want to point out because part of me was thinking that this summary representation thing that you're going on about, and saying that we don't have any evidence for the existence of, I was thinking that like certain types of people like me maybe who like higher order theories of consciousness might say things like, well, this summary thing you're talking about might be like a higher order representation. And we might have some evidence for those. And so maybe there is one representation that this thing supervenes on, and it's a higher order one, which then would answer all these objections that you give because you're kind of assuming that representationalists or intentionalists, sorry, have to be first order theorists in the argument that you guys are presenting in this paper. But you could be a higher order intentionalist and think that it supervenes on a higher order representation, like my horror theory does. And then you would have a one. So you could have a one-to-one. On the other hand, it's also important to recognize, I think, that you could have a higher order many to one. And I do in some of my work say that maybe in the prefrontal cortex, what you have is like a distributed higher order network. So you have the frontal pole and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the medial, and you have all these, and maybe like, the higher order representation, I am seeing red has I am seeing red. It might be distributed, these representations all over the place. And that would be a many to one kind of intentional, higher order intentionalism. So I was thinking that, yes, I like this distinction between many to one and one to one. And it doesn't neatly map onto this higher order, first order distinction, even though you were making this assumption in your work that it should.
So I think you should write it up about how maybe you could and you could publish it in Journal of Philosophy. as a response to you.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay. I
Uh,
mean, yeah,
yeah.
that would be. I would love to write something up on this, but interesting.
But I certainly did not want to assume that all of this only applies for first order theories of consciousness. And I don't think of the higher order, I don't think of the higher order representation in the higher order theories of consciousness as the summary representation, right? I mean, the summary representation would be something that kind of that is the only thing that the phenomenon, the character supervenes on, right?
Right.
But
So,
this,
but if there's a higher order representation, that's just one thing. That would be the only thing it supervenes on.
right? Okay. No, so yeah, write it up. That would be like a really interesting thing because I guess maybe the kind of the model we were thinking is actually just it's not. So maybe we didn't think enough about the higher order theories.
You know, that's my whole career is based on the fact that no one ever does.
Except in some parts of New York City.
Yeah, exactly. Except in those parts, and even then, yes. But and look, I'm not a true believer. Let me just put, everyone who knows me
Right,
knows
right.
this, but just so
Yeah.
you know it too. I'm not like a true convert. I'm not like a higher order theory has to be right. I just think it should be taken as serious as all these other views. And there's kind of a bias against it. Many people find it implausible, which in my opinion makes it the best kind of theory to do empirically test, because if something's implausible, then that's the kind of stuff we would love to go and look at. So to me, it just seems like it opens up a bunch of empirically interesting questions, which is why I like thinking about higher order theories. It's not so much that I'm like super convinced that they're on the right track. I am sort of intuitively attracted to that, but I'm more interested in the empirical issues that thinking through this stuff brings up, which is why I think we have a lot in common with that
Exactly.
aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Methodologically, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, I could go on and on, as you could obviously tell, but I should probably let you go and get back to your busy and important life. Let me just say thank you. This conversation has been so fun.
Thanks so much. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it has been excellent.
We should do this again soon.
Yeah, I think we've just scratched the surface. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
send you an email. We'll follow up about that because I think we could have like 90 more of these conversations. So anyway, stay
Wonderful.
online. I'll say bye offline real fast, but just once again, everyone get this book. Sorry, I didn't really have a chance to check out the chat. I see people were having a discussion, but sorry about that, guys. Um, anyway, thanks again very much for your patience with my endless questions, and we'll schedule. Hopefully, you'll be
Thanks,
back
guys.
soon.
Thank you, Richard. It was really great. I was one of my best podcast experiences. One of
Oh,
those
thank you.
podcasts.
That means a lot to me. I appreciate that. All right, we are clear. We're off the air. Yeah, I appreciate that because part of the reason I started Consciousness Live was because I wanted